I've not done a video in a hot minute on the van, the good old gambler van, but at least I don't think I have. But anyway, not so long ago, we drove this thing about 1,100 miles round trip for an event called the Great Smoky Mountain Overload. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second. I couldn't quite remember the name. It's been a couple months. But it did perfectly. The thing performed beautifully. We made it home in it, you know, drove it there, drove it back, all that stuff. Basically, the whole trip was following the Georgia Traverse. And it was technically the Florida Gambler, even though obviously it wasn't in the state of Florida. But anyway, after we made it back from that, about a month-ish later, we decided to take a day trip down to a place called Nemo. And, you know, it's in Tennessee. And van made it there just fine, rode around down there, banged around, off-roaded all day, got ready to come back. Transmission started acting up in this thing. By the time I got home, this thing would barely even pull itself. And ever since then, you can come out, start it when it's cold, it'll take gear just fine, move it around. As soon as it starts to warm up even a little bit, it slips and totally loses reverse and won't shift past second gear. So what we're doing today is we're going to start tearing the old wore out 260,000 mile 4L60 out and slap in this good old slightly less wore out 700 R4 that I got, compliments my good buddy Nathan. Came out of a 92 GMC Sierra, two-wheel drive, obviously, if you know what you're looking at. And like I said, it is a 700 R4 and not a 4L60, but that's not going to be a problem. I don't have, well, I shouldn't even say it like that. I refuse to blow the money to take this thing somewhere and spend $1,000 to get this transmission rebuilt. To replace it with another 4L60, since the van is a 95 model because of some sort of computer and wiring thing, apparently you have to have a 95 year model specific 4L60 unless you want to change a bunch of stuff that I don't want to fool with. This will bolt right in its place. The speedometer may not work anymore, but the motor, I've noticed this, the 94 Chevy C1500 I had was the same way. Even though it had a 4L60, it had the bracket up next to the throttle body for the throttle valve cable. So I don't even have to do anything but just hook that up and adjust it as needed. Swap over to the van's dipstick. I've got the wiring harness that plugs in right here out of the truck, so I'll figure out what's hot and ground, redo that, and wire up a toggle switch for the lockup torque converter. And maybe I can change the tail shaft housing and put the 4L60s on there. Maybe the speedometer is even the same. I don't know. We'll worry about that when we get to it. I could care less if the speedometer never works in this thing again, because it's not like it's accurate now, considering it has 456s and 33-inch tall tires. So none of that really matters. This is going to work just fine. So enough of me blabbing. Let's get tore into this thing. I've knocked a huge dent in this in the last little bit. Let me climb under the van here. My creeper wasn't working out, so I just threw down a rubber mat. Drive shaft is unhooked. I've just got it propped and still got the yoke in so it doesn't leak transmission fluid everywhere. Got the speedometer cable, and I don't know if you can see it. Shifter's unhooked. I'm gonna have to rob the tab off this transmission to go on the 700R because it's totally different. I've got the torque converter bolts out. I've got the cross member bolts loose. They're just kind of sticking in there. I've got the nut off for the transmission mount. I took these braces off. They bolt onto the bottom of the dust shield right there. And that is my first big problem. Of course, this won't come out because the exhaust is right in the way. We had the same trouble on Nathan's truck getting the 700R out, but the dust shield's just one of the little plastic ones in it, and it wasn't this bad. I did end up taking the starter off and just laying it over here, and that gave me, let me get repositioned here, enough room to get right in here and just bar this thing over one notch at a time with a screwdriver and take out the torque converter bolts. So the torque converter's loose. This thing is just kind of laying here at the moment. so I'm not too worried about it. Literally the only thing I've got left to take apart, I've also got the lines off, is just pull the bell housing bolts out and drop the drive shaft out, and I should be able to scoot this thing back and just drop it out of here. Once we do that, of course, the bolts, like I said, this is the heavy duty dust shield or inspection plate, whatever you want to call it. It takes big old 5/8 head or 15 millimeter bolts, and of course it won't fit right on the 700R, and I really want it to fit on the 700R because that thing's pretty nice. Plus I'd like to be able to bolt these braces back up the way they're supposed to be too. So once we get this yanked out of here, we'll see what we can come up with that. Oh, and I said earlier, yeah, let me get up off the ground. You guys can hear me grunt like an old man. Also, I said earlier that this thing already had a bracket for the throttle valve cable, and I thought genuinely that it did, and I know for a fact the 94 Chevy pickup I had the throttle valve cable bracket. This is not a throttle valve cable bracket. I thought that's what this was. It's just not. But hunted around in the shed, and voila, in about 2 minutes, found a bracket. May not be exactly what I need, but it's got the right hole. That's gonna work. So, worst case scenario, I'll cut part of this off right here, bolt this other bracket down right here, and just kind of weld the two together, because this also doubles as a spark plug loom holder. So, yeah, that's another thing we'll have to work on, but shouldn't be a big deal. I'll get it sorted out, no problem. That one just does not want to come off by hand. There we go. Two ground wires. May actually have to get a wrench on this one, and then the one down below that you can't see, I'm gonna have to get from the bottom because there's a bracket bolted on underneath the bolts right here that this shift cable actually snaps into, which of course I'll have to swap over to the other transmission, but not a big deal. 9/16 wrench. Let's see. Good night. Of course, that one's also like by far the tightest one. Okay, let's find a little bit. Alrighty, and there goes that wrench. Okay. Well, how about this one? We'll just take it and stick it right back on there. Wow. Okay. Okay, so here is the bottom view. That's the last bolt I got to get out right where my middle finger is. I don't know how well you can see it. And like I said, there's the tab for the shifter that just pops on and off. And then one thing you don't have to do, but I'm gonna do, I actually did it on my nice fan as well. I kind of scratched a couple of marks. I'm gonna cut a piece out of this cross member and notch it, so when I get the other transmission in, I can get in there with a socket and drop this pan, or well, not this pan, but the one on the other transmission, so I can do a fluid and filter service. And that way I don't have to take the cross member completely out in order to do it, because it sucks. So yeah, we're almost ready to drop this thing. As soon as I get this other bolt out, I'm going to roll the jack up in here, take some weight off, pull out the cross member, slide the drive shaft out, and let it leak all over the place, and we'll be ready to rip this baby out of here. There we go. Something like that. Watch me pry it loose and the whole thing just fall out and hit the ground. Of course, I mean, not like it would really matter at this point. It's not like I'm pulling it out just for the fun of it. Ever so gently. Ever so gently. On there, Betsy. Sorry, folks, for this terrible camera work. I'm just going to turn this off for a second. Alrighty. I do believe she is separated from the engine. Now, me ever so carefully pull out this drive shaft here. And I'm sure it'll leak. Oh? Oh? Well, the drive shaft is leaking, but not the transmission so much. I'll tell you what really sucks about this is it's only been like maybe, probably not even a year since I put a fresh tail shaft seal and bushing in this thing. Lower this baby down just a hair. So that's probably low enough. Where's that leaking from? This thing's leaking all over the place. I'm getting blood bathed. Alright, so while I'm waiting for the 50 gallons of transmission fluid to soak up and some kitty litter under the van, I went ahead and fabricated up a throttle valve cable bracket. I actually measured the distance, and this is not the correct hole, but it'll work. I'm gonna make this work. But anyway, I measured the distance on the cable as it came out of the truck, and from center of the little plastic piece when it's bottomed out on the end of the cable and the face of this with the clip seated in it was about 4 inches and 1/8, and I think this is about 4 inches even, and that thing's got a good inch of play in either direction where I can adjust it, so I think that's going to work just perfect. I might have to shim this up a little bit to bring it up a little higher, because whenever you put a throttle valve cable on, you want it to be as level and straight as humanly possible. So, like I said, as far as left to right, I've got it just about perfect. And, like I said, may have to put a couple of washers in there and shim it upward, but it should be just fine. I think it'll work just fine and dandy. So, that's where we're at right now. That bracket that was in here, I pretty much just cut the little piece off that the spark plug loom goes on, the wire loom, is what I'm trying to say, and just bolted it back on there. And of course that's under an intake bolt, so when I took that out, I had to put some thread sealer back on that bolt when I got ready to put it back in there so it wouldn't leak water. So yeah, coming right along. At some point I will clean up the mess that's under the van, and we'll commence to cramming the other transmission in here. So Oh, and also, I've got to still figure out some way to get that stupid dust shield out of here. And I'm not cutting the exhaust. I will literally smash that thing with a hammer before I cut the exhaust to get it out of here. So, we'll see what happens. Alright, so I cleaned up my mess. Got some new mats thrown down here. Obviously went and ate dinner, and it is obviously dark. Also got the dust shield off, and what a shame it was. I had to pull the flywheel. That exhaust pipe is rock solid. I'm not even about to get into these studs to try to unbolt the exhaust. So it was easier just to take the flywheel off. So, here in a minute, I'm gonna grab the old torque wrench and get out here, souse that baby back down to 65 foot-pounds. That's what I read on the old Google. So hopefully that's right. As far as I'm concerned, it's right enough. Flywheel back on. Since the other transmission doesn't even have the right bolt holes or anything, and actually I'd also discovered where this bolt's on, these bolt holes around through here, the other transmission actually has like little bosses that poke out that these line up with. The 700R does not. So, bad as I hate to not put that back on there, I guess I'm not putting it back on there. But whatever, it'll be fine. I'll save this piece, and well, I'm gonna save the whole transmission. Eventually, I may try to rebuild that thing myself. But, so yeah, that's where we're at. We're not far away from cramming that 700R up in here. Also, I just now remembered, I still need to swap the shifter tabs. So, here we go. Well, when you got a weak back like I do, you gotta make things work. But I got the front of the transmission hoisted up, and then I actually threw the strap end of a ratchet strap around the muffler and just sort of put my weight on it and pulled the tail end of the transmission up. And got it part of the way on my good old brake drum transmission jack. I don't know how well you can see all that mess back there, but yeah, we're making progress, making big progress. Pretty happy. So, oh, and of course you know, and I don't think you can see it either, but I bloodbathed the driveway with transmission fluid again in the process. So, things are going good. Okay, probably can't see nothing. Let me grab a light. Oh yeah, there we go. So, I've got the transmission started in there, got it up on the jack. Just got a little ways to hoist it up, move it forward, and slam it in there. And then I'll start these bolts in first to get that shifter cable bracket back on there. Pleasantly, I discovered earlier, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but the plug-in for the speedometer is exactly the same. So maybe, just maybe, that'll actually work. Pretty excited. I'll be driving this baby out of here tonight. Or, well, I say that. I might not be driving it out here tonight. We'll see. We'll see. I'm excited nonetheless. So, here we go. Alright. This turd officially has a 700R4 transmission in it now. I don't have the cross member in yet, but it's bolted to the motor. Yeah. Gear shifter's hooked up. Let me see if I can situate us some light in here. It's like midnight, 1 a.m., sometime around in that neighborhood. Shifter's hooked up and working. And then get down here. And I've probably mentioned it like 5 times at this point, but I had originally thought this motor had a bracket for a throttle valve cable on it from the factory, but it turned out to be for something totally different. So I had to make a bracket, kind of welded around there on it, used a factory hole in the intake, put a bolt down there through the, I'm pretty sure that's a hole for a spring, like a return spring, that some of these did and some of them didn't have. And, but yeah, it's on there, and if it's not an adjustment already, it should be very close. But that's on there and working. So I got to get the cross member slapped in this thing and do a quick fluid and filter change on this thing, and it'll be ready to fire it up and see if it moves. So cross your fingers for me, folks. Cross your fingers. Alright, so it's the next day. I got some video footage last night after I buttoned this thing up and, you know, got it filled with transmission fluid and changed the gasket and all that. But it was dark. I didn't really get very good footage, but I did test drive it up to the end of the road and back. And I actually did it twice. I think I only filmed the first time, and it was still a little bit low on fluid, and I couldn't hear anything because I didn't have the doghouse cover on. So I've got everything buttoned up. Fluid is definitely topped off now. I've got this tire aired up like it should be. So we're about to fire this thing up and drive it around in the daylight, and I'm gonna mount the camera inside on the roof mount that's kind of behind the seats. So here we go. All right. I'm going to take a quick little test drive up the street, see how this thing acts. That's much better, much quieter in here. Or if my CB still works. Yeah, it looks like it. Alright. At some point my little arrow, my indicator broke off, so just kind of have to play it by feel to tell what gear you're in. right here and kind of take off normal, see how it shifts. Pretty much instantly shifts through all 3 gears. So, gonna have to do a little bit of playing with the throttle valve cable, I think. But that's okay. Not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. Yeah, it shifts just a little bit too quick. And of course, I still don't have a switch hooked up to the lockup torque converter. It's not really that big of a deal, and speeds as slow as we're going right now, I think we're not really going to get going fast enough for the torque converter to lock up or be giving a consistent enough throttle input. So until I get ready to really drive this thing on the highway, I'm not going to worry about that.